All right, let's get into it. Today, we're digging into a fierce 2,700-year-old warning for leaders that honestly feels like it could have been written yesterday. We're breaking down Micah, chapter 3. Right out of the gate, Micah doesn't pull a single punch. He just launches in with this direct, almost aggressive question aimed squarely at the people in charge, the leaders of the nation. You see, the fundamental duty of any leader back then was crystal clear: know justice and make sure it's upheld. But what the prophet Micah shows us is a pretty grim reality.
And let's be really clear about this. For these leaders, knowing justice wasn't just, a line item on their job description. It was the whole job. It was the entire reason they had any power to begin with.
But here's the twist. Micah accuses them of completely flipping the script. He says they actually started to hate what was good and love what was evil. I mean, they turned their most sacred duty completely on its head. And this is where the language gets incredibly graphic. Micah uses this shocking, really visceral metaphor to describe their economic exploitation. Now, obviously this isn't literal, but it paints this brutal picture of their abuse of power as an act of cannibalism. They were literally devouring the very people they were supposed to be protecting. And this abuse of power, it wasn't just random. Oh no. It was systematic. This corruption had seeped into every single level of leadership, and Micah tells us it was all being driven by one single, very powerful motive. Yep. At the root of all this societal decay, good old-fashioned greed. Every broken duty, every single act of injustice, you could trace it all back to the endless pursuit of personal profit. So basically, justice, spiritual guidance, even truth itself, they weren't sacred duties anymore. They just became things you could buy and sell. The entire system, political, legal, and yes, even the religious system, was running on bribes. And this is the part that is just wild. It shows their hypocrisy so brilliantly. They actually believed their religious status, their temple, it was all a shield. Kind of like a spiritual insurance policy that let them act as corruptly as they wanted without any fear of consequence. So what happens then? When justice is totally abandoned and the leadership is just rotten to the core? Well, the text delivers a really chilling verdict. You might expect fire and brimstone, but the first consequence isn't a loud bang. It's something way more unnerving. It's silence. The irony here is just devastating, isn't it? The same leaders who completely ignored the cries of the oppressed would find their own cries falling on deaf ears. That very connection to God they took for granted was just gone. And it's so important to get this straight. This silence isn't God just being indifferent or checking out. No, it's presented as a deliberate, powerful response. It's a profound form of judgment for the total breakdown of justice. And the ultimate result of this divine silence is the complete physical collapse of their city, of their most sacred places. Their corruption wasn't just going to cost them their souls, it was going to cost them their entire world. But right in the middle of all this corruption, Micah draws this incredibly stark contrast between the false prophets who are just serving themselves and his own very, very different mission. I mean, look at this. Here we see two completely opposing models of leadership in the sharpest possible relief. On one side, you have prophets whose message is literally for sale. What they say depends on who's paying them. And on the other side, you have Micah, whose authority and message come from a completely different source, the Spirit of the Lord. Micah basically says, that's not who I am. He defines his own mission not by what people want to hear, but by what God has commanded him to say. He's not selling comfort. He is fueled by the Spirit to courageously confront injustice and sin head on. So what does all of this really boil down to? At its heart, Micah is presenting us with a fundamental choice. It's a choice between two competing values, two totally different ways of organizing a life and a society. The entire crisis, the whole thing, is distilled right here in this battle between two value systems. There's one where money is the ultimate measure of everything, a system that turns people into tools and faith into a transaction. And then there's the other, where divine justice and compassion are the things that matter most. And in the end, this 2,700-year-old text does so much more than just critique some ancient leaders. It holds up a mirror to every single one of us, asking a timeless and frankly, a deeply personal question.
What fundamental values are really guiding our decisions today?